Today on Ag News Daily.
Channeling Good started as a project after the derecho to help out local areas in Iowa that were severely affected. And since then, Channel's brought it out to a more national level.
The most exciting part is being in the Bay organization. We have 10 product launches in the next 10 years.
Yeah, I think we've got a really great lineup that we're bringing out this year, something that's going to step us up above the competitors. We've got some new seed treatments coming out as well. I think we're just kind of in that growth part of Channel where we're kind of stepping into new adventures. And I'm excited to see where it's headed.
Well, welcome back to the weekly edition of the Ag News Daily Show. We are here with our floaties on.
We kind of need to be driving over here to the studio this morning. A lot of ponded or getting ponded fields.
Yeah, thankfully it's come a little bit slower here in central Iowa, but I would still say we're nearly 4 inches of rain in the last week, and that's about enough.
Yeah, I don't think I've seen any planters roll in a while.
No, these daily rain chances have been pretty much across the U.S. and have now started contributing to planting delays, but are still improving soil moisture levels and will provide a benefit to those in wheat country. Heavy showers and thunderstorms moved through parts of central and the southern plains earlier this week. On Wednesday, they brought that welcome moisture to previously dry areas. There's more widespread rainfall that's expected into next week, which should support soil moisture but could put even further delay on planting efforts and the increased risk of severe weather. These heavy rains across parts of the Midwest have helped drought conditions, but in much of the area, there is an exception for northeastern Iowa. These wetter conditions are certainly creating some challenges to the planting season, as it'll be interesting to see how far planting progress has gotten. These several weather systems had frontal boundaries that are expected to move through the region to close out your month of April and begin May wet as well, continuing that active and unsettled pattern. Still, we will have some intermittent dry periods between storm systems that may offer a short window for field work, but particularly where soils are not overly saturated. The lowland flooding is gradually receding in parts of the Mid-South and the lower Midwest. However, now with additional rain coming here late this week, those targeted regions in the further north and west areas of central Texas into the Mississippi Valley will see again raising concerns of renewed flooding and potential further delays for shipments on river and barge traffic.
Yeah, that's the thing. The breaks of rain happen, but it's not long enough to let the field dry out. Well, U.S. corn planting slightly outpaced both last year's pace and the 5-year average last week, according to the latest crop progress report released on Monday. As of Sunday, 12% of the nation's corn crop has been planted 1 percentage point ahead of last year and 2 points ahead of the 5-year average. Iowa has been leading the progress with now 18% planted, 11 points ahead of its average pace. Kansas followed at 27% complete, and Texas also at 69% complete, compared to its 5-year average of 66%. In contrast, Illinois and Indiana have trailed their averages with just 7% and 2% planted, respectively. On the soybean side, about 8% of intended soybean acres have been planted nationwide. That's 1 point ahead of last year's pace and 3 points ahead of the 5-year average. But again, Tanner, I don't think we're going to see a lot of progress on next Monday's report.
We might see that Illinois and Indiana number flip-flop and get back ahead of pace, but unfortunately, ahead of pace is farm bankruptcies. Bankruptcies grew 55% from 2023 to 24 and are trending even higher, unfortunately, in 2025, according to Bloomberg Law. This is in the time when farmers are continuing to struggle with the low prices for agricultural commodities and the high costs of inputs that are needed to grow these crops. Bloomberg reports added such pressure as unpredictable tariffs, immigration policy changes, cuts to federal ag programs, the frozen USDA funding are what is making it harder for farmers across the area to access financial help. The Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago says that 4.3% of its district's farm loan portfolio was rated to having major or severe repayment problems in the final quarter of 2024. That's the highest level Delaney since the end of 2020. Meanwhile, the Kansas City Fed reports that As farm debt continues to grow and economic conditions worsen, loan delinquency rates have begun to inch up in their district as well from previously historic lows. And according finally to the American farm landowner of Iowa, Iowa leads the nation in farm bankruptcies so far this year with 12 cases already been filed. So not a great upbeat news headline to share with our audiences.
No, but probably in response to some of those bankruptcies and, of course, just the ongoing disasters farmers deal with, Secretary Rollins has announced a new round of disaster assistance, more than $340 million aimed at helping farmers, ranchers, and rural communities hit hard by natural disasters. This announcement came Tuesday during a visit to North Dakota. Secretary Rollins says the USDA Disaster Assistance Fund will provide critical relief to communities that have waited far too long for support. As part of the package, $25 million will go to storm-impacted communities in North Carolina, another $18 million to Tennessee, and both states are still recovering from hurricanes dating back to 2022, including Fiona, Ian, Idalia, and Helene. The USDA says it's also streamlining the process, pledging to deploy aid as quickly as possible. There are clearly backlogs of requests, and they've also waived some of the eligibility limits, like income caps and population thresholds, to ensure that help reaches those who need it most. So don't have confirmation yet on just an all-over subsidy payment, but we do see this disaster program as the next one.
Well, U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said that steep tariffs between the U.S. and China are not sustainable, as the Trump administration signals a willingness to ease trade tensions between the world's two largest economies. Speaking to reporters on Wednesday, Bessent said that the current tariffs, which are at 145% on Chinese goods and 125% on American exports, amount to a near embargo. He emphasized that both sides recognize these levels can't continue and meaningful trade talks will resume. However, Bessent made it clear that President Trump won't make the first move unilaterally. A source familiar with discussions say that the White House is open to slashing tariffs on Chinese imports significantly, potentially even down to 50%, according to the Wall Street Journal. But the White House spokesperson dismissed that report as pure speculation and said any updates on tariffs would come directly from the president himself. Experts say the ongoing trade war has already cost U.S. producers valuable market share in China, which I think we're all seeing.
And I was reading something earlier this week that said August is about that timeline when we will start to feel the effects of these tariffs at prices at the store. Continuing with the trade front, the Office of the U.S. Trade Representatives is taking decisive action to rebuild America's shipbuilding industry and push back against what it calls China's unfair dominance in the global maritime sector. Following a year-long Section 301 investigation, USTR Jamison Greer announced new measures late last week on Thursday, April 19th, according to a press release aimed at restoring U.S. competitiveness in shipbuilding, logistics, and maritime trade. Greer says, quote, ships and shipping are vital to American economic security and the free flow of commerce. He added, our action will begin to reverse Chinese dominance, address threats to the U.S. supply chain, and send a demand signal for U.S.-built ships. This plan rolls out in two phases. For the first 180 days, there will be no new fees. After that, fees will kick in for vessel owners and operators of China-based ships, calculated by net tonnage per U.S. voyage and set to rise significantly over time. Operators using Chinese-built ships will also face incremental fee hikes, and the administration will offer new incentives to encourage the use of U.S.-built liquefied natural gas vessels. This move is part of a broader strategy to bolster U.S. industrial capacity and reduce reliance on foreign maritime infrastructure. And can attest to that. When I was in Vietnam back in February, lots of vessels that sit there empty for extended periods of time.
It takes a long time to build a ship, too. Republican lawmakers in the U.S. Senate introduced legislation last week that would strike down California's animal welfare law created as a result of Proposition 12, drawing support from the nation's largest pork interest group. The Food Security and Farm Protection Act, introduced by Senator Charles Grassley, Republican of Iowa, Joni Ernst of Iowa, Roger Marshall of Kansas, would prevent any state or local government from passing laws that interfere with commerce and agricultural practices outside of their jurisdiction. Proposition 12 makes it a criminal offense and a civil violation to sell whole pork meat in California unless that pig comes from, is born to, a sow that is housed within 24 square feet of space, and in conditions that will allow that sow to turn around without touching an enclosure. Of course, Proposition 12 applies to any uncooked pork that is sold within that state, regardless of whether it was raised in California or not. So it'd be good to see something like that get passed and provide our producers more options.
Well, in some other House-related news here, House Republicans are eyeing May 8th as the target date for the Agriculture Committee to advance its portion of a sweeping legislative package tied to President Trump's domestic agenda, according to a report from Politico's Meredith Lee Hill, citing sources familiar with the timeline. This bill is certainly ambitious, Tanner. It combines tax cuts, energy policy, border security, and more, but of course, there's a major divide between the House and Senate on how we're going to pay for it. The House wants the Agriculture Committee to deliver $230 billion in spending cuts. In contrast, the Senate Ag Committee has only committed to trimming $1 billion. So definitely a point of contention there. As we look also at other contentious points, the future of SNAP, or the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, formerly known as food stamps, is also on the docket. SNAP, of course, supports more than 40 million lower-income Americans and is a key part of this debate as Republicans weigh deep cuts and fund other parts of the package. Adding to that tension is also Farm State Republicans. They're pushing to include billions of dollars in new funding for farm programs, especially to raise crop reference prices, despite concerns that the bill is already packed with those provisions. These efforts reflect the growing doubt that Congress will pass a standalone bipartisan farm bill this year as well. With few other legislative vehicles available, lawmakers are trying to use their massive package to address some of these unresolved ag priorities that they think may not get addressed in the Farm Bill. So we're maybe seeing some things shuffle around here, Tanner, into this new piece of legislation.
That's right. Well, we've got an update that we haven't talked about in quite a while. What's next for Summit Carbon? South Dakota regulators have once again denied Summit Carbon Solutions the bid to build a portion of its multi-state carbon pipeline. On Tuesday, the Public Utilities Commission voted 2-1 against the company's revised permit application, calling the proposed route not viable. This marks the second rejection for Summit, which has been trying to secure its permit since 2022 for the South Dakota leg of its $9 billion pipeline project. The company reapplied last year after the commission denied its original plan. The proposed pipeline would transport carbon dioxide captured from ethanol plants in 5 states to an underground storage site in North Dakota. Some of that carbon, officials admit, could be used in enhanced oil recovery from aging wells. Summit hopes to tap into lucrative federal tax cuts for carbon sequestration, but now faces additional hurdles after South Dakota lawmakers passed that law banning the use of eminent domain for carbon pipelines. Governor Larry Rodin signed that legislation back in March. We'll continue to keep an eye on this, but eminent domain typically allows private developers to access land for public projects, with landowners receiving compensation. But under this new law, the carbon pipelines are excluded from that process. So, in response to Tuesday's vote, Summit said it plans to refile with a reduced scope that will continue working with landowners and ethanol plant partners in that area. So haven't heard much out of those projects for a while.
They're certainly not giving up, though.
They certainly are not giving up. But now let's venture to Argentina. Argentina is poised for a major boost in corn exports. This is according to a new report coming from the USDA's, how do you say that?
Attaché office of Buenos Aires.
In Buenos Aires. Exports are now expected to hit 37 million metric tons in the upcoming 2025 and 26 marketing year. This would be the third highest level on record, up from 34 million tons the year before. Top buyers of Argentinian corn include Vietnam, Peru, Malaysia, South Korea, Chile, and Saudi Arabia. How many of those have you been to?
A good handful.
Well, I figured so. On the production side, Argentina is forecasted to harvest 54 million metric tons of corn, up from 49 million last year. This would mark the country's fourth largest ever crop. The USDA says the planted acreage will climb nearly 13%, reaching 17.8 million acres. Farmers are favoring corn over soybeans this year thanks to that strong projected returns, especially in Argentina's key grain belt where wheat and soybean rotation is also typically common.
Yeah, I have been to Argentina, can attest to that. You know, they had that really bad drought a few years ago. It seems they've moved beyond that here. But as we look at some other international trade partners, Vietnam, their trade ministry has issued a new directive aimed at cracking down on the illegal transshipment of goods to the United States and other trading partners. This move comes as the country looks to avoid some of those steep U.S. tariffs, according to a document reviewed by Reuters. This directive, dated and effective April 15th, warns that trade fraud is likely to rise amid increasing trade tensions over U.S. tariff policies. And while this directive doesn't name specific countries behind the fraud, nearly 40% of Vietnam's imports come from China. U.S. officials have previously accused Beijing of routing goods through Vietnam to sidestep American duties. And I can attest to that as well. Being in Vietnam, back in February, China's kind of a bully in that part of the world. And Vietnam really does want to do business with the U.S. here. They're very interested in coming to the table. They've already issued quite a few responses here in response to the tariffs that we've seen put in effect here. And so in response to some of these new pieces of information, their prime minister has directed officials to take action against trade fraud and counterfeiting. So comes again as Vietnam's preparing for some of those discussions. And again, I would say most of the Vietnamese people we spoke with when we were in the country, they don't really want to do business with China, but feel that is maybe their only trade partner.
I would assume so. We haven't talked cotton in a while. The USDA is forecasting a strong rebound in the global cotton production for 24 and 25 marketing year. The latest projections put worldwide output at 120.9 million bales. That's 7% higher than the highest total since 2017-18. Despite a slight dip from last month's estimate, production outlooks are mixed among major cotton-producing countries. Declines are expected in India and Pakistan, but those losses are more than offset by gains in China, Brazil, and the U.S., as well as Australia. Global meal use is also projected to tick towards 116 million bales, a 1.1% increase over the previous year. However, among top spending countries, only China is expected to reduce its cotton consumption. With production outpacing use, the global ending stocks are forecasted to rise 7%. Marking the second highest inventory level at 78.9 million bales since 2015 and 16. Meanwhile, the global cotton imports are expected to decline by 4%, down to 42.4 million bales.
Well, part of the reason we might be seeing maybe a shift away from cotton is because new products such as hemp continue to surge as well, which can in some cases be used as an elastic replacement product. As we look at hemp production here, we're seeing a 40% increase from the previous year. That's according to the USDA's National Hemp Report released last week. Planted acreage jumped 64% to nearly 45,300 acres, while harvested acres last year rose to just under 32,700. This growth was largely driven by floral hemp production, which saw production more than double to 20.8 million pounds. That's up 159% from 2023. According to feedandgrain.com, both increased acreage and stronger yields fueled the gains. Harvested area was up 60%, yields averaged 669 pounds per acre, and that brought the overall acreage to about 1,700 pounds per acre. Floral hemp accounted for a massive 87% of the total value of hemp grown outdoors. Meanwhile, hemp seed posted the most dramatic rise in value, soaring nearly 500% to just under $17 million. The report signals renewed momentum in the hemp sector as growers respond to improving market conditions and consumer demand, and is certainly an interesting one to keep an eye on, Tanner.
Absolutely. I like keeping an eye on pistachios, but do you like pistachios?
They're maybe not my favorite nut.
They're not? Well, there is some fun news related to this topic. This year's pistachio crop is estimated at 1.1 billion pounds as the world's pistachio supply continues to climb. The U.S. is now the largest contributor to this, producing over half of the global supply. Jim Zion with Meridian Growers said in late March, one of this year's U.S. crops will be the 1 billion pounds and will be largely sold out because of the growing demand in high-quality crop that most processors are looking for. Nearly 90% of the pistachio crop is sold. The industry struggles with predicting what upcoming harvest yields will be because early estimates can vary. I know they're expensive in the grocery store.
They certainly are.
Last year's off year for the crop, initially estimated at 1.1 billion and dropped to 800 million pounds, then came back up to 1.2 billion and 1.3 billion pounds, but ended up right where they originally projected it. So who knows, Delaney, where the ending crop numbers will come in, but as of right now, it looks like a good crop.
Well, Tanner, taking a look at this week's interview, we've got a little bit of a feel-good interview maybe to start our conversation here, catching back up with some folks from Commodity Classic, specifically Channel Seed, to talk about some new initiatives to ultimately serve their rural communities. We're chatting today with Matt Blodet from Maine and Ellen Rahn from Illinois, two folks that you wouldn't think would know each other, but some fun dynamics coming up here. We're going to dive into Channel's refreshed Channeling Good Initiative program. This program is now taking a more local approach by empowering Channel SeedPros to nominate nonprofit organizations in their own communities for rural funding and supporting that local focus. So let's turn it over to that conversation.
Well, it's not often that we get to do some fun, feel-good conversations and stories like this. We're chatting today with Matt Blodet and Ellen Rahn, both farmers and involved in the Channeling Good Initiative, which we'll get into here in just a little bit. I'd love to learn a little bit more about each of your backgrounds. We were talking a little bit before we got started here. You each have some really unique areas that you're in part of the world, but also just some really unique stories. So Matt, maybe let's start with your background and history.
Yeah, so graduated from the University of Maine, business. I started with the Channel organization in 2019, became a seed pro. We live in southern Maine, and we are part of my wife's family farm in southern Maine.
But you don't like lobster.
I do not like lobster. It's terrible. It's terrible. It doesn't taste like a ribeye.
And Ellen, what about your background?
I'm from Northwest Illinois. My husband and I farm as well. I started with the Channel brand in 2018 and have been a seed pro ever since. I went to Iowa State University. I did the tri-state tour, as I call it, because I started in Illinois, went to Iowa, then Wisconsin, and back home. So, yeah.
I love that.
Go
clones.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Can I have you? I'm just going to have you pull this up just a
It's
little
a
bit.
funny
There you go.
story before we get going.
Yeah.
I think it was in 2010. When was New Century Farmer? 2010, the Collegiate FFA.
Yeah.
I was a representative from Maine, and her husband Justin was representative from Illinois.
Wow.
We met there, and then I think my first Channel trip in Mexico.
In
I was
2020,
like, "That's
actually.
Justin Rand over there. I went over, and I didn't realize Ellen was a seed pro. So
Yeah.
it's a small world.
Yeah, you never know how you're going to get connected and then
Yep.
maybe reconnect later in
Yeah.
life. I love
Met
that.
in Iowa, reconvened in Mexico.
Yeah.
Right? How could you go wrong?
So many good connections, but let's talk more about Channel's Good Initiative and how it's recently evolved as well. Let's start with you.
So Channeling Good started as a project after the derecho to help out local areas in Iowa that were severely affected. And since then, Channel's brought it out to a more national level. And they allowed all of us seed pros to apply for a nonprofit organization in our communities that we felt strongly about. And so last year was the first year for that. And I forget how many seed pros. Do you know?
I don't remember how many seed pros, but they awarded $175,000
Wow.
Yeah.
across the country.
Yeah.
The local organizations, yeah.
To bring it back to our hometowns, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. So where we're at in Iowa, we were hit pretty hard from the derecho. That was not a fun week without power.
No.
And so I really appreciate sharing some of that backstory. So you each have submitted projects as part of this initiative. Walk us through what those projects were.
So I nominated our local food pantry. It's a food pantry and self-help organization. Unfortunately, we're in an area that's kind of been hit hard with poverty lately. And our numbers are increasing at the food pantry every day. It's kind of sad, but it was a nice way to give back to them, to help them out so that they could at least get more supplies to help those in need.
Wow.
I nominated our local 4-H baby beef club. My wife and her brother grew up showing in that club, and they're pretty good friends with the advisor of that club, so it's her local county fair, so we thought that was a good fit.
Wow. What has the response been? What have you been hearing from the community?
I had really good feedback. I mean, everyone was very pleased and happy and loved that, like, we're able to give back to our local community and help out.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, likewise, it was pretty well accepted.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's just so unique to see a company stand up, take an opportunity to help local communities where you guys are located as SeedPros and really invest in your local communities. You don't always hear about companies doing that, so it's a really unique experience. What has some of the feedback been from other folks in your seats as SeedPros that you've been able to discuss about this project?
I know a couple of my other fellow SeedPros donated to like some rescue organizations like fire departments and stuff for grain bin rescue systems and stuff, and that's been really, really well received too. Some of that equipment can be really costly, so help cost share that. It's been pretty cool.
And something that's needed everywhere, especially
sure.
in the ag community.
Even in Maine.
Yeah.
I think sometimes it's easy to just go to your day job 8 to 5 or be a farmer and not always think about how else can I serve, how can I volunteer, and ask those questions. So how have you really balanced doing your job and helping in the seed side, but giving back? How have you really balanced those two?
I feel like it's kind of part of the norm for me. I mean, I grew up in a family that always gave back and always had some kind of volunteering going on. So growing up and being able to do the same thing is kind of a rewarding factor, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I grew up in the FFA organization. That was one of the pillars, is giving back in leadership. So it's a smooth transition into professional.
I'm glad we were able to start with a little bit of that discussion, but I want to talk a little bit more about what's ahead here for 2025, because Commodity Classic is the event where we see companies coming together, launching new products, launching new ideas and innovation. For those of our listeners who aren't familiar maybe with the SeedPro role, let's start there and tell us a little bit more about, in that role, what are you really doing?
Yeah, I'll go. One of the pillars is service. We sell service before we sell products. Obviously, products and performance have to be table stakes, but service is the main pillar for sure.
Yeah, I would 100% agree with that.
Separates us as a brand, I feel like.
Yeah.
So as you think about what's ahead here for the 2025 growing season, what are the things that have you both really fired up?
I think we've got a really great lineup that we're bringing out this year, something that's going to step us up above the competitors. We've got some new seed treatments coming out as well. So, I don't know, I think we're just kind of like in that growth part of Channel where we're kind of stepping into new adventures, and I'm excited to see where it's headed.
I come from the dairy world, and silage is a big part of my business, so we've really, Bayer has really focused on forage hybrids specifically, grain hybrids and forage hybrids specifically, so that's been huge in my area. So.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit more about that. That's not often a topic we get to talk a lot about, being from the Midwest, but it's certainly
I know enough to be dangerous.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit more about some of that lineup then that you're looking at here for this year for forage.
So we're corn on corn in Maine. There's cornfields and trees. That's it. So we do a corn snow rotation. So rootworm is becoming an issue, especially with climate change. The weather's getting warmer and warmer, so we're going to start seeing those populations increase. So SmartStax and SmartStax Pro with the new RNAi technology is going to be really big for us because we're corn on corn. So that's the major one in our area. And then the Precision short corn system has really shown really good fiber digestibility, which is one of the metrics in silage corn because it's not so tall. It doesn't need to have that fiber to stand up.
Yeah.
So it's really digestible. Cows really love it. So
we probably could have used that back in 2020 during the trade show.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, probably.
Definitely.
Now, you mentioned seed treatment. I'm really interested about that. Tell me a bit why that was such a need to really explore into now as we're going into the growing season of 2025.
So I feel like in the soybeans, we're always fighting diseases. And it seems like in our area, too, we're always getting hit with that August rain that really can drive those yields down or just impact the soybeans with, we find a lot of sudden death in our area too. And so I think having this new seed treatment is going to be something that's going to step us up above the competition. It's going to be unique just to the Channel brand. So that's exciting and kind of going to give our growers a way to be different.
And that's the Channel Edge.
Channel Edge, yes.
Yeah, I was actually on the National Dealer Council when we brought that last year up. We wanted a proprietary product to the Channel lineup, and we're adding an extra fungicide for rhizoctonia, which is a big disease. So, and it's not a co-pack; it's a single package versus Acceleron. So there's a couple selling points that our seed pros are pretty happy about.
It's going to be a lot easier for treating beans.
Disclosure, I don't sell any beans.
Yeah, corn on corn.
Again, no enough to be dangerous.
Well, that was one thing I just wanted to ask maybe as a follow-up, Ellen, is the seed treatment something growers need to buy and have it ready to go to be delivered that way, or is it a seed treatment that's going to be able for growers to apply for themselves at the farm?
It's actually a seed treatment that we bring in as dealers and then apply before we take it to the farmer.
Okay.
So,
yeah. I know that's just been an interesting trend, too, to see lately is it seems like more growers are interested in doing their own seed treatment on the farm, so I thought I'd clarify that.
Yeah.
And you keep saying it's unique. What is truly the unique as you look at the seed treatment opportunity? What really makes it unique?
Well, it's only going to be offered to Channel. It's not going to be out there with any other brand. So I think that is a standalone to make it unique.
Mm-hmm.
And that added fungicide.
Well, yeah, that too. I mean, that's really the benefit, the added fungicide. But, yeah.
I just love the chemistry that you guys have here. Even, Iowa or Illinois to Maine, you're not geographically close.
No.
So you probably don't get to see each other all that often. But
We talk a lot, though.
Yeah,
we do.
It just speaks volumes to the culture that I'm sure you guys have as that Seed Pro group. And tying that into that Channeling Good initiative just really seems like you guys are a very dynamic, close-knit group.
Channel is really good at that, keeping our dealer network pretty close. There's a lot of leadership events. And
it's like a family.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Yep.
As you guys think then about just beyond this year, is there anything else that has you really excited, whether that's this new good initiative, other products, the seed treatment? What else has come down the pipeline that has you jazzed up?
I think the most exciting part is being in the Bay organization. We have 10 product launches in the next 10 years between active ingredients on chemistry side and traits, and that's more that's been released in the last 25 years. So it's going to be really fun to be part of that.
Yeah,
because no other seed company has that in the pipeline.
Exactly.
So,
well, where can people find more information and really connect with you all?
So Channeling Good has its own website, so you could go to channelinggood.com. Otherwise, you
can go to channel.com and just type in your zip code and you find your local seed pro. And if you're interested in doing the Channeling Good, just reach out to the local seed pro. All of our contact information is right on the web. So
yeah.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
awesome. Thank you.
Well, it's great to even catch up on some of the highlights, too, from their past growing seasons. But now we've got highlights from the fertilizer market. Josh Linville from StoneX provided the fertilizer media update earlier this week, and he discussed nitrogen, phosphates, and potash. Nitrogen values for the New Orleans urea have reached the 460s, the highest level since 2022, and are up over $130 per ton since the start of 2025. But North American UAN is scarce and is expected to have sizable volume availability come June or July. Phosphate international inventories and stories continue to drive prices higher due to the lack of Chinese exports. And while India purchased vessels in the 640s and 700s, they are now refusing to buy anything north of 675. New Orleans DAP traded at 650, which is the second worst ratio in history for the second time this year, only behind that of 2008 when comparing it to December 2025 corn at $4.54 per bushel. Potash demand is quieted. The values have remained flat. Rising hopes for more aggressive pricing in the summer through the tariff story will continue to be watched, according to Linville. That's what happened in fertilizers this week. Delaney, what's happening around the rest of the commodity markets?
Well, as we touched on it earlier a little bit in the show, I want to come back to it. Those fresh rumors that the Trump administration is considering cutting China's tariff rate from the current 145% to somewhere to between 50 to 60% certainly surged some optimism on Wall Street. President Trump went on to tell reporters this week he's been in official contact with Chinese officials about a potential deal. However, China negated that, saying it was, quote, fake news, and has done little to confirm that they are willing to come to the trade table. Export sales this week came in higher at the higher end of the trade estimates for corn and the lower end of estimates for soybeans, and at the bottom of expectations for wheat, with some net cancellations seen. Regardless, though, corn and soybeans bounced higher on Thursday, in particular for corn there on those strong export numbers. But slow planting and rain delays may continue to be a story the market falls back on in between news stories here, Tanner. So that's kind of the big headlines driving markets this week.
Yeah, I think across social media, it has been interesting watching this planting delay, at least in the state of Iowa. Not only are people getting their shops cleaned out and necessary repairs made, but now we're all twiddling our thumbs, and I'm afraid it's going to start moving to houses and garages.
You can come clean my garage.
No, thank you. I have my own mess to deal with. But listeners, we appreciate you and all that you do when you tune in to us. Continue to share this with your friends and give us topic suggestions. Check us out on YouTube. Come watch us rather than just listen. But Delaney, what do you say for this week? Should we let them go?
Let's let them go.